Thank you for listening to the Solanos Stories, a companion to the Smithsonian's traveling exhibit, Crossroads, Change in Rural America, presented in downtown Trinidad, Colorado. Solanos Story salutes the farmers, ranchers, cowboys, and cattlemen who helped shape the Southwest, and their trusty hats. Bob Knox, written by the Old Bradford Hat. Howdy! As you look through this collection of cowboy hats, you will probably notice that there aren't very many wearing the brand I carry. I'm an old Silver Belly Bradford hat. I came to Raton, New Mexico back in the early 1950s. I was sitting on a shelf in Delicios when a tall, lanky cowboy named Bob Knox tried me on, and we just kind of clicked. I was a little high-priced for a working cowboy, but Bob and his wife Betty decided I was the one, and so my adventures began in the Knox family. Bob was a cowboy working at Philmont Scout Ranch then. Bob stood around 6'4". I was up pretty high when he put me on, so I could get a pretty good view of things. Of course, being new and pretty good looking, I didn't get out in the dirt and weather much back then. I went to a few dances, church occasionally, and didn't see much cowboying for a while. Always got the best treatment, never put on a bed, and nobody better mess with me or they would have Bob to answer to. Bob was born in Denver, Colorado. He came from a fine family. His dad was a brand inspector for the state of Colorado for over 25 years. His granddad was one of the first brand inspectors in the state of Colorado. His mother came from pretty good stock herself, having filed on and proved up a homestead in Baca County, Colorado. He had 3 uncles that were sure tough old cowboys, and they got Bob started off on the cowboy trail when he was a little kid. He never did grow out of this cowboying idea. He came down to Cimarron when he was 17 and worked for the CS Ranch through spring branding and got hooked on the Cimarron country. Bob graduated from high school in Manitou Springs and went down in the Texas Panhandle around Pampa, cowboying for the Hayhook Ranch, but he liked the mountain country around Cimarron and came to work for Sandy Valdez at the WS Ranch. Philmont was paying a little more than the $85 a month the WS offered, so Bob hired out to them. Bob met his wife-to-be, Betty Maldonado, while working for Philmont. They were married in 1951, just before Bob went off to serve a hitch in the Navy. Not wanting to make the Navy a career, Bob came back to Cimarron when he got out of the Navy and started cowboying for Judd Knight, riding out of the Ring Place on the Vermejo Park Ranch. By this time, Bob and Betty had a little boy, Robert Charles, called him Little Bob. Bob and Betty decided to quit cowboying, and they moved to Arizona, where Bob worked for Arizona Public Service Company for 3 years. While working in Phoenix, they were blessed with a little girl named Myrna Ann. The cowboy bug kept biting Bob, and they left Arizona and came back to Cimarron and Philmont again. Bob went to work for Bob Luttrell, running the cattle department for Philmont. This was a good place to raise a family, and little Bob and Myrna got a good start in ranch life. The family moved down to the Galenas Ranch near Corona, New Mexico, where they lived for a little over 3 years before the call of the Cimarron country got the best of them, and they came back to Philmont in 1965. Bob and Betty decided they wanted to try a business venture, so they leased a bar and restaurant up in Taos, New Mexico. Now, this was quite an experience. Bob's experience in a bar had been on the other side of the bar, and he had a lot to learn. Betty knew a lot more than Bob did about this deal, and somehow they survived the 2-year lease agreement. And soon as the lease was up, they hightailed it back to Cimarron. You guessed it, back to Philmont. Bob took on the job of ranch superintendent for Philmont. Little Bob had got married while they were in Taos. Myrna got married shortly after the family came back to Cimarron. My days as a dress hat came to an end and got put to work, shedding rain and snow, dodging tree limbs as we chased cattle and horses, eating a lot of dust. I enjoyed getting out and cowboying, even though it was a tough life for a hat. I got pulled down pretty tight on Bob's head a lot of times, got knocked off a few times when he didn't dodge a tree limb quick enough. We roped a lot of steers in those days and hung on pretty tight. I was always treated with a lot of respect and never mistreated. Bob moved over to cattle foreman for the UU Bar Ranch in Cimarron in 1980. I punched cows with him there for a while, and he finally decided to retire me here at Solanos in Raton. I had made a pretty good circle coming back to rest here in Raton. Bob stayed with the UU Bar for 14 years, managing the ranch for 13. When the UU Bar sold in 1994, Bob and Betty moved into Cimarron, where they live today. Bob comes in pretty regular and always has time to say howdy, old pard, to me. Next time you're in Solanos, take a minute to look up on the wall at me and my friends. Be quiet, just listen. Bet you can hear the cattle bawling, hear a horse snicker, maybe get a slight smell of burned hair from a branding corral, smell a little trail dust, or the smell of a cool mountain morning after a good rain. Hear the cowboys hollering and laughing, spurs jingling. Partner, you are looking at some of the best hats that came from some of the best cowboys in the country. Thanks for thinking of us. You should hear some of the stories we tell after the store closes at night. Well, come to think of it, maybe you shouldn't hear some of them. Y'all come see us. The Old Bradford Hat. P.S. Bob came by the other day and told me he'd been writing a book about his cowboying life. Now that ought to be a dandy. He is calling it Growing Up to Cowboy. Look for it. I bet it'll give you a laugh or two.